any of you guys seen Granny?
I saw her this morning. She looked okay.
Too bad she's dead.
She's dead? Wow. I thought she'd been awful quiet for the last year.
Maybe we should take her out of the kitchen and bury her in the backyard.
No way. I don't want to smell up the backyard.
Well, Ghost Granny is the name of our first story. It's about a girl named Kelly who is being haunted by her own granny. Granny Deaver is dead and buried. So why is her ghost hanging around the house, howling till all hours of the night? How do you get rid of a ghost that's ruining your life? When you readers find out, you'll howl too.
I like this story. It stays with you like a really good skin rash.
I give it 6 thumbs up.
Ghost Granny. I know it's wrong to hate someone in your own family, but the truth is we all hated Granny Deaver. She wasn't our real grandmother. She was a friend of our grandmother's sister. She came to visit us one day and never left. She stayed for 3 years. I feel terrible for saying it, but she totally ruined our lives. I sat across from her at every dinner. She slurped her soup and let it run down her chin. She clicked her teeth and burped really loud. My brother Jeff sat next to her. She liked to grab food off his plate and gobble it down before he could complain. Sometimes she used his napkin to blow her nose. "Kelly, you eat like a bird," she would say to me. Then she would pinch my arm so hard. I'd scream. "Put some meat on your bones," Granny Deaver would cry. Then she would cackle her head off as if it was a really funny joke. She was always sneaking up behind Jeff and me and pinching us. She loved to pinch the back of our necks. Once, she pinched my arm so hard I started to bleed. We tried to be nice to her, but she never stopped complaining. "Is this vegetable soup or dirty dishwater?" she would ask. She slurped it down, making horrible sucking sounds, and she complained about every spoonful. She always complained if someone got a bigger portion than she did. Sometimes she would grab food off our plates and feed it to her cat. Sammy, her cat, was more horrible than Granny Deaver. The cat liked to scratch our legs with his sharp claws. When he wasn't scratching us, the cat took his claws to the furniture. If we tried to pet him, he would bite us. Sammy constantly missed the cat box, and he was always coughing up disgusting things. Granny Deaver refused to clean up after him, so Jeff and I had to do it all. Luckily, Sammy ran away one day and never came back, but we were stuck with Granny Deaver. At breakfast, she drank the milk right from the carton. One morning, her teeth fell into the carton and she kept right on drinking. After that, Jeff and I gave up cereal. Whenever my friends came over, Granny Deaver would sit in the middle of the room and cackle so loud we couldn't talk. If I led my friends to another room, Granny Deaver would follow us. I had no privacy. I had no life. One day, Granny Deaver wiped her mouth on the silkscreen art project that I'd spent weeks on. "That's an art project?" she cried. "It looked like a napkin." I went storming into Mum and Dad. "I can't take it anymore," I screamed. "She's horrible, horrible. Why does she have to live with us?" Mum raised a finger to her lips. "Kelly, she'll hear you," she scolded. "I don't care," I shrieked. "I can't take it anymore." Dad lowered his newspaper and shook his head sadly. "I feel the same way," he told me. "But what can we do? She's an old woman and she has nowhere else to go." But, I sputtered, holding up my ruined silkscreen. "She's not related to us." "She moved in here and now she acts as if she's the queen of everyone." "We're her only family," Mum said softly. "We can't just toss her out on the street." "Why not?" Jeff grumbled. "Because we're nice people," Dad replied. "We believe in doing what's right. Ah! I let out an angry cry and shook my fists at the ceiling. It was no use arguing with my parents. We'd have the same conversation a million times. They were as helpless as Jeff and I. What could we do? I turned and stormed up to my room. To my surprise, I found Granny Deaver in my clothes closet. "What are you doing in here?" I demanded. I gasped when I saw that she had pulled my clothes off the hangers and tossed them on the floor. "My closet is too small," she grumbled. "Come in here and help me hang my clothes in your closet." I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, I wanted to pick up the bony old woman all by myself and heave her out the front door. Imagine how strange I felt when she died that night. Jeff and I had never been to a funeral before. The funeral parlour was dark and cold and gloomy. Even the flowers Mum and Dad bought didn't brighten it up. The four of us sat on a hard bench in the front row. Behind us, an old man played slow, sad music on an organ. No one else came to Granny Deaver's funeral. She didn't have any friends. She almost never went out of the house. So no one else in town knew her. I stared up at the dark wood coffin. Dressed in her best black dress, Granny Deaver lay on her back with her arms at her side. Her silvery hair was neatly brushed, her eyes were closed, her cheeks were rosy red. I stared hard at her. Was it really Granny Deaver? When she was alive, she was always so pale and yellow. The organ music grew louder, then it stopped. A man in a black suit stepped up beside the coffin. He asked us to bow our heads in prayer. I bowed my head. I tried to feel sad. I know that you are supposed to feel sad at a funeral, but I couldn't. Mum and Dad sat silently with their heads bowed and their hands in their laps. Beside me, Jeff fidgeted and coughed. I knew they didn't feel sad either. Staring down at the floor, I had some pretty strange thoughts. It was just like Granny Deaver to die 2 days before my birthday, I thought bitterly. She was always ruining everything. I wondered if Mum would still let me have my party, or if we would have to be in mourning or something. I didn't feel like mourning. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but as the sad organ music started up again, I wanted to sing and dance and jump for joy. We were all feeling pretty giddy at dinner. Mum and Dad kept humming some silly song I'd never heard before. We all laughed like crazy when Jeff's spaghetti kept falling off his fork. Finally, he picked up a long strand between his fingers and slowly sucked it into his mouth. Usually, Mum or Dad would give him a hard time for being such a slob, but tonight it was funny. Tonight, everything was funny. We all felt so good, so cheerful. I felt as if our family was back. We couldn't be ourselves while Granny Deaver was here. We could never act natural. But now we were back, and it felt so great. Mum scooped out big bowls of chocolate ice cream for dessert. We started to eat it, and all four of us burst out laughing for no reason at all. It was the happiest night I could remember in a long, long time. Later, as I lay in my bed trying to fall asleep, I realised I still had a smile on my face. I finally drifted off at 11 or so, but I didn't sleep for very long. I woke up suddenly and glanced at my clock radio. 12:20. I heard a banging noise from downstairs. Soft thuds. The sounds must have awakened me. Is someone walking around down there? I wondered. Who could be awake this late? Yawning, I lowered my feet to the floor and listened. More soft thudding footsteps. It might be Jeff, I decided. He ate way too much ice cream and then complained he had a stomach ache. I pulled my nightshirt down and made my way to the hallway. Leaning on the banister, I crept down the stairs. I heard a cough, a bump. Yes, someone was in the kitchen. I tiptoed through the dining room and stopped at the entrance to the kitchen. The lights were all off. Someone was moving around in the darkness. "Jeff," I called out, my voice hoarse from sleep. "Is that you?" I clicked on the light. Granny Deaver! The rosy red colour had faded from her cheeks. As she smiled at me, her skin was a sickly green and her tiny eyes had sunken back into her eye sockets. I'm back, she declared in a throaty whisper. But I stuttered, my whole body stiff with horror. I couldn't stay away, Granny Deaver whispered, smiling with peeling blue lips. There's just too much to do. Before I could back away, she rushed at me. She threw her bony green arms around me, trying to hug me. So cold. Her arms were so cold. I could barely feel them. As they wrapped around my shoulders, I felt only a rush of cold air. Cold, sour air. I shivered and uttered a sick cry. As Granny Deaver floated back, I heard another cry from behind me. I spun around to see Jeff, followed by Mum and Dad. Their mouths were open in horror, their eyes bulged. She's back, I choked out, pointing to the ghostly green form that hovered in front of me. No, Mum wailed. Dad grabbed Mum's shoulder. I couldn't tell if he was trying to calm her down or hold himself up. I can see right through her, Jeff stammered in a tiny voice, and then he let out a scream as Granny Deaver reached out to pinch his cheek. Her fingers cracked as she tried to clamp them onto Jeff's skin. Jeff's knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor. Granny Deaver tossed her head back in a whispery cackle. Her tiny eyes rolled wildly in the gaping eye sockets. What are you doing here? Mum finally choked out. Granny Deaver floated off the floor. I came back, she whispered. I didn't want you to miss me. But you... Mum's words caught in her throat. Go on back to sleep, Granny Deaver ordered. I'll keep my old room in the attic. It's cramped and it's drafty, but I don't care. I'm dead anyway. I felt another gust of cold, sour air as she moved past me. We all turned and gaped in horror as she floated up the stairs. It's impossible, Jeff declared, shaking his head. Dad nodded. Yes, it is impossible. He swallowed hard. But we saw her, and we heard her. She's back. Granny Deaver is back. She's dead, and she's back, Mum murmured, her expression dazed. What are we going to do? I wailed. I'm frightened, Jeff admitted. I'm really frightened. We're all frightened, Dad replied. But what are we going to do? I repeated frantically. Mum rubbed her temples with her fingertips. She always does that when she has one of her headaches. It's too late. I can't think clearly, she said. But I sputtered. Your mum is right, Dad agreed, sliding his arm around her waist. We're all too shocked and frightened. We can't come up with a plan tonight. But she's in the attic, Jeff cried, raising his eyes to the ceiling. There's nothing we can do tonight, Dad said. Let's all go to sleep. We can talk about what to do about her tomorrow. But tomorrow is my birthday party, I wailed. Dad narrowed his eyes at me. I could see that he had forgotten all about my party. But I hadn't. 8 of my friends were coming over in the afternoon. I couldn't have a birthday party with a cackling old ghost floating around. Don't worry, Kelly, Mum said. She'll be gone by your party. Right, Dad agreed. How do you know that? I demanded. She can't stay here, Mum replied. She's a ghost. She has to move on to wherever ghosts go, right? Right, Dad agreed again. I think Dad was so shook up he would agree to anything, Mum said. Do you promise she won't spoil my party? I demanded. Mum and Dad exchanged glances. Let's talk about it in the morning, Mum said. We'll figure out what to do. I know we will. Mum gave Jeff a hug. She guided him to the stairs. Let me tuck you in. Do I have to sleep in my room? Jeff asked in a tiny voice. You'll be okay in your room. She won't hurt you, Mum told him. It's only Granny Deaver after all. But she's a ghost now. How do you know she hasn't changed? I thought to myself, but I didn't say it out loud. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up over my chin. I knew that I'd never get to sleep. My whole body was still shaking. My blood pulsed against my temples. A ghost, I thought. We have a ghost in our house. And not just any ghost, the ghost of Granny Deaver. Will she be as gross and unpleasant as she was when she was alive? I wondered as I gazed up at the ceiling. I gripped the edge of the blankets tightly with both hands. Will she stay and stay and stay and ruin our lives forever? She can't, I told myself. She's dead. She can't stay. She doesn't belong here anymore. With these thoughts whirling around in my brain, I finally fell asleep. But a short while later, I was awakened by the brush of a cold hand against my cheek. Jeff, I whispered. I sat up, blinking. Jeff, is that you? I felt the cold touch on my cheek again and squinted into the pale green face of Granny Deaver. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I gaped at her in horror. What do you want? I finally managed to whisper. I can't sleep, she croaked, the tiny sunken eyes locked on mine. Maybe the dead don't sleep, she sighed. Maybe I'll never sleep again. You'll stay awake and keep your old granny company, won't you? She tried to pinch me. Her fingers made a sick, cracking sound as if her hand was falling apart. But I couldn't even feel the pinch. I only felt a brush of cold. We'll have a nice chat, Granny Deaver said, floating above me. Your room is so much more comfortable than mine. Kelly, so much warmer. Now that I'm dead, I don't know if I want to stay up in the attic. Maybe I will move in with you. I couldn't help it. I tried to hold it in, but a horrified moan escaped my throat. Granny Deaver didn't seem to hear it. Now that I'm dead, she continued, I need to stay closer to the living. She pressed against me, tried to give me a hug. My stomach lurched. I swallowed hard. I thought I was going to toss my dinner. Cold, sour-smelling air wrapped around me. I shivered. I couldn't stop shivering. She fluttered away, vanishing for a moment into the darkness of my room. Then she shimmered back into view. I met the nicest people in the cemetery, Granny Deaver sighed. All dead, of course. I gripped the edge of the blankets tighter and squinted through the darkness at her. Why was she telling me all this? Did she really plan to stay up talking all night? Granny Deaver tisk-tisked. She bit her peeling lips. I never believed in ghosts, she said. I mean, who in their right mind believes in ghosts? But I do now. She shifted in midair. Oh, I did meet some ugly ghosts in the cemetery. You and your brother aren't exactly the greatest looking people in the world, but believe me, Kelly, you're a beauty compared to them. These ghosts were ugly with a capital. Ugh. Thanks a bunch, I muttered under my breath. They were falling apart, Granny Deaver continued. Just falling apart, piece by piece. She shook her head, frowning. I said to them, listen to me. Just because you're dead, you shouldn't stop worrying about your appearance. She sighed again. But they were all so nice, such good new friends. That's the thing about dead people. They stick together, and they stick up for each other. She floated higher until she was staring down at me from the ceiling. Look, I'm flying like Peter Pan. I could never stand that sappy play. She shut her eyes. Her face glimmered. Green in the pale light from outside the window. What was I talking about? Oh, yes, my new friends at the cemetery. She floated closer to me, so close I could feel the cold wind on my face. Are you listening to me? She demanded angrily. A dead person here. How about a little respect? Of course I'm listening, I choked out. I'm frightened. I'm sorry, but you are really scaring me. She turned away from me. I can take a hint. Even a ghost can tell when she isn't wanted. Sorry, I murmured again. I didn't know what to say. Finally, she floated out the door. Pleasant dreams, she whispered, but she didn't say it sweetly. She said it bitterly. She vanished out the door. I sank back into my pillow and shut my eyes. The clock radio read 2:45 in the morning. I tried desperately to fall asleep. I didn't want to sleepwalk through my birthday party the next afternoon, but as soon as I started to drift off, a loud howl made me sit up. Huh? I gasped. Another long, frightening howl rose up from somewhere above my head. The attic. Another low moan rising to a screeching cry. Granny Deaver is howling up there, I realized. Howling at the top of her lungs. Howling like a ghost. I dropped back into the bed and covered my head with the pillow. Another long, mournful howl. I pressed the pillow harder over my face, over my ears. What am I going to do? I wondered out loud. I can't take this. I can't. What am I going to do? I hurried down to breakfast, eager to discuss the Granny Deaver problem with my family, but the horrible old ghost was already seated at the breakfast table when I came into the kitchen. Jeff sat across from her, glumly staring down at his scrambled eggs. I saw that he hadn't taken a bite. Mum and Dad stood side by side in front of the kitchen counter. They both looked pale and tired. Mum had her nervous eye twitch back. She hadn't had it for years. "These eggs are too runny," Granny Deaver complained. She moved a fork through the eggs on her plate. She tried raising a forkful to her mouth, but the eggs went right through her green skin. "Runny shmoney," she muttered bitterly. She dropped her fork onto the plate. "What difference does it make? I can't eat. Do you believe it? The dead aren't allowed to eat. Is that fair?" She shoved her plate away from her. "Enjoy your breakfast, everyone," she said sarcastically. "Enjoy it while you can." She motioned for me to sit down. "Come on, Kelly, have some eggs. You eat like a bird. Come on, don't just stand there gawking as if you've seen a ghost." She cackled. "Did I just make a joke?" she exclaimed. "See, I'm dead, but I'm still joking. That's what I call spirit." She cackled some more, a disgusting sound like dry coughing. She sighed. "A lot of good it does me. I can't even eat one of your disgusting runny eggs." I glanced at Mum and Dad. They lowered their eyes to the floor. Reluctantly, I took a seat next to Jeff. "How are you doing?" I whispered. "You okay?" He shrugged. "No whispering," Granny Deaver declared. "No secrets, you two." Her eyes had sunk even farther into her skull. Her upper lip had completely fallen off. "You were talking about me, weren't you?" she accused Jeff and me. "What were you saying about me, Kelly?" Nothing," I replied softly. "I just said good morning." Granny Deaver humphed. "You say good morning to your wimpy little brother, but you don't say good morning to someone who has just died?" "Good morning," I said, and then I blurted out, "Why were you howling like that all night?" The old ghost shrugged her bony shoulders. "Beats me," she replied. "I guess I was bored." "But it was so loud," I complained. "I didn't sleep all night." "There you go again," Granny Deaver replied, rolling her tiny eyes. "Only thinking of yourself. Stop being so selfish, Kelly. Why don't you stop to think about me once in a while?" "Well," I started, but Granny Deaver instantly interrupted me. "I'm a ghost. I'm supposed to howl. How dare you complain about it?" She turned to my parents. "Young people have no respect. No respect." Before anyone could reply, Granny Deaver turned her attention to Jeff. "Sit up straight, young man. Do you want curved bones like mine? Would you like to be a ghost like me, walking all hunched over? Sit up straight." "I don't believe this," Jeff whispered to me, rolling his eyes. "She's dead, and she's still picking on me." I turned to Mum and Dad. Mum shrugged helplessly. Dad just shook his head. We couldn't talk. We couldn't make a plan about how to get rid of Granny Deaver. Not while she was sitting right there, grumbling and complaining and listening to every word we said. "We have a lot to do today," Mum started. "We have to get everything ready for Kelly's party." "Party?" Granny Deaver snapped. "Party? How can you have a party when I just died?" It's my birthday, I cried. We've been planning this party for weeks. Granny Deaver rose up from the table. Her skin, her clothes, her eyes had all faded to a pale green. Seems like a strange time to have a party, she said, her nose in the air. Am I invited? I really don't think I'm in a party mood. Huh? Invited, I gasped, and then I totally lost it. No, you're not invited, I screamed. I don't care if you're in the mood or not. You're not invited. It's my 12th birthday party and all my friends are coming and I don't want you to spoil it. I was breathing hard when I finished that speech, glaring sharply at Granny Deaver, hands on my waist, her mouth open to reply, but then she closed it. She rose up over the kitchen, growing paler, so pale she was difficult to see, as if her body was made of a wisp of smoke. I can take a hint, she said finally, in a whisper. Her eyes grew dull and blank. She faded toward the door. I can take a hint. I know when I'm not wanted. She floated from the room. All four of us stood in silence, staring at the doorway. She got so pale, Jeff said finally. So weak. Do you think she disappeared forever? No, Dad replied, shaking his head. I saw her float up the stairs. She probably went to her room. And will she stay up there? I asked. Will she stay up in the attic and not come down and terrify my friends? Mum shrugged. We'll see, she said softly. We'll see. We worked all morning getting the house ready. Jeff helped me with the decorations. Then he went with Dad to the bakery to get the cake. Mum baked homemade pizzas and made a big salad. A little after 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My first party guest. I pulled open the front door and greeted my friend Gina Lang. Happy birthday, Kelly, she said. Then she stepped into the house, raised her hands to her face, and screamed. Huh, Gina, what's wrong? I demanded. I spun to the steps. Had Granny Deaver appeared? No sign of her. I forgot your present, Gina exclaimed. Oh, I don't believe it. I'll be right back. She turned and ran back out the door. Through the window, I could see her running across the street to her house. I let out a long sigh of relief. Granny Deaver, please stay up in your room, I prayed silently, crossing my fingers on both hands. Please don't spoil my party. A short while later, everyone had arrived. We all talked and hung out for a little while. Sorry to hear about your grandmother, my friend Wendy Martin said as I made my way to the couch to open presents. She wasn't really my grandmother, I replied. I raised my eyes to the stairs. No sign of Granny Deaver. But she lived with you for a long time, right? Wendy asked. I nodded, yes, a long time. I started opening presents. Gina gave me 3 CDs I really wanted. My friend Nedra gave me 2 tickets to a rock concert downtown, one for me and one for her. I was having a pretty good time. We were all laughing and kidding around. I got some totally cool presents. I wanted to enjoy every minute of the party. I mean, a person only turns 12 once. But I couldn't be totally comfortable. I couldn't really be relaxed because I kept watching the stairway, watching for Granny Deaver to appear. After I opened my presents, we hung out for a little while longer. Then Mum brought out the home-baked pizzas, and we moved into the dining room to eat. The party was going really well, and it was helping me cheer up a lot. For some reason, in the middle of lunch, we all started singing camp songs. Wendy, Gina, and I had spent last summer at the same sleepaway camp, and we remembered every word of every song. We were singing and laughing at the same time. Then Nedra took 2 pepperonis off her pizza and put them over her eyes. She looked like some kind of red-eyed monster. It wasn't that funny, but it cracked us up. And a few seconds later, we all had pepperoni eyes. Okay, calm down everyone, Mum called from the kitchen. It's cake time. Dad hurried to get his camera. Here we go, Mum declared. She stepped into the dining room carrying the cake on a big platter, the pink and yellow candles glowing. Ready to sing, she asked. Before anyone could start, I heard a low moan. Wendy let out a startled cry. A few other girls cried out. I turned to the doorway. Granny Deaver billowed into the room. She smiled a toothless smile. One of her eyeballs had fallen out. She squinted with an empty eye socket. "Kelly," she rasped, "will you save a slice of cake for your dear dead Granny?" The disgusting green ghost floated over the dining room table. Everyone screamed, chairs scraped and toppled over as girls scrambled to stand up. Mum dropped the cake, the platter cracked and the cake made a sick splat sound as it hit the floor. Squinting with her one eye, Granny Deaver tossed her head back and cackled. "Afraid of a dead person," she shrieked. "What's wrong with you girls? Afraid of a dead person?" Screaming shrilly, my friends scrambled to the front door. Coke spilled, another chair fell to the floor. Nedra tripped and fell. With a frightened cry, she jumped to her feet and ran to catch up with the others. "Wait," I shrieked, "don't go, wait!" But they were out of the house in seconds. Wendy was the last to leave. She turned back. She stared up at the cackling ghost over the dining room table, let out another scream, and vanished out the door. "No, please," I called after them weakly. "Please don't go." Gone. They were all gone. I turned to Granny Deaver, my hands tightening into fists. "How could you do this to me?" I shrieked. "How could you ruin my birthday party like that?" Dad set down his camera and hurried over to me. He put a hand on my trembling shoulder. "Aren't you going to take my picture?" Granny Deaver demanded. She grinned and a tooth fell from her mouth. It landed in the birthday cake, which lay in a heap on the dining room carpet. "How could you do this?" I shouted again. I took deep breaths to keep from crying. Granny Deaver slowly floated down to the floor. Her hair was wild around her face. I saw to my horror that her chin had cracked open. I could see bone underneath the skin. She bent down and lifted a chunk of birthday cake off the floor. "Chocolate?" She turned to me and made a disgusted face. "Who gets chocolate for a birthday cake? You know I don't like chocolate. What's wrong with vanilla?" "It's not your birthday," I shrieked at the top of my lungs. "It's my birthday and you ruined it." She gasped as if stung. "Have a little respect for the dead, Kelly," she scolded. She took a small bite of the cake. "I can't taste a thing," she told us. "Not a thing. I guess the dead can't taste." She sighed. "But if I could taste it, I'm sure it'd be way too rich. Next time, get a normal cake. Get vanilla. Or even a nice lemon cake." That was it. I couldn't take any more. I let out a furious cry. I broke away from my dad and rushed at the old ghost with both fists raised. I don't know what I thought I was doing. Actually, I wasn't thinking at all. I was in too big a rage to think. "Go away!" I shrieked at the old ghost. "Go away, go away, go away!" To my surprise, Granny Deaver coiled back. Her one eye grew wide. She raised both hands and arched her back like an animal about to attack. She bared her few remaining teeth and let out a shrill animal hiss. Her eye glowed bright red, her whole body billowed up like smoke from a chimney, and her face began to change. Her features shrank as her head grew. Long fangs slid over her broken chin. Claws curled out from her bony, raised hand. She hissed at me, an ugly, menacing hiss. Her putrid, cold breath swept over me. "Kelly!" she rasped through her fangs. "Kelly, be careful. I'm a ghost, Kelly. I'm dead. I have my evil side now. You really don't want to see my evil side, do you?" Fangs bared, claws outstretched, she rose above me, ready to attack. With a startled cry, I shrank back and lowered my fists. Another animal hiss escaped her lips, her red eye flashed. I stared in horror at the ugly, hissing creature. "This isn't Granny Deaver," I told myself. "This is some kind of creature, some kind of dead creature using her face, her shape." "Be careful, Kelly," she rasped again and swiped a claw close to my face. "Be careful, or I—" She suddenly stopped. Her mouth dropped open. The strange animal face twisted in surprise. Her claws slid back into her hands. The fangs vanished, and her head began to reshape as Granny Deaver's head. The old ghost had a startled expression on her face, as if she couldn't control what was happening to her. I'm tired, she whispered. So tired. She turned away from us slowly. She faded almost to nothing, then shimmered back, faint and dim. Floating low over the floor, she wearily made her way to the stairs. As she started up, she let out a sigh after sigh, as if each step was a struggle for her. I huddled close to Dad and watched until she vanished up the stairs. Then I rested my head on his shoulder, shutting my eyes. Wow, I heard Jeff mutter, and then he repeated it. Wow. What a mess, Mum said softly. I'll never get the chocolate cake stains off the carpet. Dad uttered an unhappy sigh. We've got a bigger problem than chocolate stains, he said. Yeah, I agreed. We have a disgusting, frightening ghost in the house. A chill ran down my back. She looked pretty weak before she left, Jeff murmured. Maybe she is going to fade away. She was weak at breakfast, I replied. Then she came back stronger than ever, I sighed. She's probably up in her room, resting up, getting ready to spoil our lives in some new way. Mum shuddered. I'm really frightened now, she confessed. She took Dad's hand and held onto it. What are we going to do? Dad gazed back at her for the longest time without replying. Finally, he said, we have to ask her to leave. That won't do any good, I cried. She won't just leave. Why would she? Where would she go? Mum asked Dad. Back to the graveyard, where she belongs, Dad replied. She won't, I repeated glumly. She won't go. I know she won't. She's going to stay here with us forever. Dad shook his head. There's got to be a way to get rid of her. But how? How do you get rid of a ghost? That night we went out for dinner. We didn't want to take a chance on Granny Deaver spoiling another meal. We ate our food without talking. What was there to say? This was the worst birthday of my life, I grumbled as we finished our dessert. At least it's a birthday you'll never forget, Dad replied, forcing a smile. I knew he was trying to cheer me up, but I didn't want to be cheered up. Could we stay at a motel or something tonight? Jeff asked. I really don't want to go home. I know what we can do, I cried. We can sell the house and move. What good will that do? Mum asked. We won't tell Granny Deaver our new address, I explained. You mean sell someone a house with a ghost living in it? Dad asked. That wouldn't be a very nice thing to do, would it? Who cares? I moaned. Maybe she'll be gone when we get back, Mum said. She held up both hands. She had her fingers crossed. Maybe Granny Deaver realized she was making us unhappy and she went back to the cemetery. Yeah, maybe, I said softly, but I didn't believe it. None of us did. Later, I was lying on my back in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard Granny Deaver begin to howl. I gazed up toward the attic as the sound of the howls floated down over me. Soft at first, almost a whisper, then shrill and loud as an ambulance siren. Animal howls like a wolf baying at the moon. Howl after howl. I pressed my hands against my ears, but I couldn't shut out the frightening sounds. I tried covering my head with my pillow, but that didn't help either. And then I heard the doorbell ring downstairs, followed by several hard raps on the door. I jumped from bed, the howls still ringing in my ears. I ran downstairs. I was the first to reach the door. Who's there? I stammered. Open up, please. A man's voice, loud and firm. It's the police. Huh? I let out a startled gasp and pulled open the door. Mum, Dad and Jeff appeared behind me. We stared at a young officer with curly blonde hair, round cheeks and flashing blue eyes. He didn't look like a policeman. He looked about 18. He held his uniform cap in one hand and a police badge in the other. Can we help you? Dad asked, pulling his bathrobe belt tight. Mum brushed back her hair with both hands. Is there a problem, officer? The young cop nodded. We've received complaints from your neighbours about loud howls coming from your house. It's just our dog, Dad told him. We're very sorry. We'll get him to quiet. No, it isn't, I cried. We don't own a dog. Dad shouldn't make up a story. Maybe the police officer can help us, I thought. Maybe he can help us get rid of Granny Deaver. The officer slipped his badge into his back pocket and narrowed his eyes at me. It isn't your dog howling. Kelly, please, Dad pleaded. I ignored him. It's a ghost, I told the officer. We have a ghost in our attic and she's driving us crazy. A smile spread over the cop's smooth round face. Yeah, for sure, he said, snickering. A ghost. I'll believe it when I see it. But then his smile faded and his blue eyes bulged as he stared into the house. We all turned to see what he was staring at. Granny Deaver! She roared into the living room, shimmering bright green, floating over the furniture, her fangs sliding out of her mouth, raising her curled claws and roaring a lion's roar. No! The officer opened his mouth in a cry of disbelief. His cap fell to the ground, but he didn't stop to pick it up. He turned and bolted off the front stoop. Hey, wait, I called. Please? But he never looked back. He ran to his cruiser in the driveway, jumped in, back down the driveway without even closing the door, back down and squealed away. The ghost roared and screeched behind us. I turned and gasped, horrified by its snarling creature face. So evil, so dead. Did you try and turn your old granny over to the police? It growled, rising higher, closer. No, I started. Liar! The ghost screeched, and then it swept over me, raised both hands and swiped its long, sharp claws across my face. Ah! A weak cry escaped my throat. I stumbled back, waited for the pain to rush over me, waited, and then laughed. A high, startled laugh, because I couldn't feel a thing. I rubbed my face. There were no scratches, nothing. The old ghost roared and swiped its claws over me again. I stood there without flinching. You can't hurt me, I cried. I can't feel a thing. You're helpless. No! It was the ghost's turn to wail. It opened its jaws in a long, loud howl of protest, and then it exploded. Exploded into millions of tiny green pieces. The pieces floated in the air for a few seconds like confetti falling down, and then they vanished. The four of us were alone in the living room, all alone, without a ghost, staring at each other in shocked silence. Jeff was the first to speak. Kelly, how did you do that? He asked. I stood up to it, I replied. Remember when Granny Deaver's ghost got weak at breakfast, and later, after my party? Both times I got angry and stood up to her, and both times she became weak and frail. I guess a ghost can't exist if you stand up to it. And now she's gone, Mum cried happily, and we can all return to normal. We were so happy. We hugged each other. We cried. Then we couldn't stop laughing. Such a wonderful, joyful moment. We were still laughing when we heard the knock on the front door. Who can that be? Mum asked. She pulled open the door, and we stared out at a horrifying group of people. Men and women all bent and twisted, their eyes sunken and as blank as glass, their faces dead. Dead people, green and rotting. At least a dozen of them, limping up the lawn, climbing onto the front porch. Who are you? I choked out. We're from the cemetery, a hunched man whispered, staring up at us with vacant eye sockets. We met Granny Deaver there. She was so nice she invited us to come and stay. Huh? I gasped. Granny Deaver? She what? They crawled and hobbled past us into the house. Where is Granny Deaver? The hunched man asked. She isn't here, Dad told them. The dead man sank into the couch and put his feet up. That's okay, he said. We'll wait.